This is really something that is plaguing a lot of people across the country, unfortunately. So the beautiful part is that there is a law that was passed and recently extended to January 31st of 2021 that says you cannot be evicted if you were impacted by the coronavirus. And what you have to do is first file what's called a CDC declaration with your landlord. Give that to your landlord. You print it, you sign it, and you say to your landlord, I can't pay my rent, and it's because I've been impacted by the coronavirus. So once you give it to your landlord cannot move forward with an eviction. If you have an eviction that's pending in court, you should also give it to the court, showing that you've given it to the landlord, and that will stop your eviction. The CDC declaration form is really easy to find. If you just hop on Google and type in CDC declaration, it'll pop right up. You download that, print it, sign it, give it to your landlord. If the eviction is not based on non-payment of rent, then the moratorium does not apply. So landlords can still evict tenants for breaching the lease outside of the payment aspect. So the moratorium wouldn't stop that type of eviction. Unfortunately, once the moratorium expires, you will then owe whatever that back rent is, and you're also going to owe the late fees if they are written in the lease. There's also a program here locally that's put on by Cleveland Housing Network. It's a Writ assistance fund, and many tenants have applied to this fund, and they've gotten, I've seen 6 months of rent, back rent covered. And so the eviction is dismissed, because if the landlord accepts the money, they then have to dismiss that eviction. So that is a very good resource that everybody, if they're in this situation, should look into. So another resource is the legal aid. They have a new program that's called Right to Counsel. And this program will assist certain people. There are eligibility factors, but certainly you should look into this program and reach out to legal aid for help if you need it in that way. So if you have problems in the apartment that you're living in terms of maintenance, what you want to do is send a message to your landlord. Make sure that it is something that is in writing, so that you can reference back to that notice if you need to. Once you've sent that notice, give your landlord a reasonable time to fix it. If it depends on what the issue is, right? If it's a heat problem and it's in the middle of the winter, a reasonable time is going to look different from, okay, there's a leaky faucet, right? So just give your landlord, enough time to fix this issue. If he doesn't fix the issue, then you can let him know that either you're going to break your lease, or you're going to put your money in the local court in what's called an escrow until the problem is fixed. So this is kind of a gray area. Typically, the lease will govern what the landlord is required to do in terms of this type of snow removal. And there's really no official state law that governs this, but there is a local ordinance that requires property owners to keep certain areas free of snow and ice. So it is arguable that the landlord is certainly responsible as the property owner to keep things clear of snow and ice in the wintertime. If you're in a situation where there's loud construction, that's tough, right? Because you do have the right to quiet enjoyment as a tenant. However, if you go to your landlord and say, hey, pay me for the noise because it's a breach of my quiet enjoyment, it's unlikely that a landlord will pay you for that, right? And so then it becomes, is this problem so huge that you'd want to file a lawsuit? And so certainly, based on your right to quiet enjoyment, you could file a lawsuit to recover the damages. But at that point, paying court costs and attorney's fees, it just may not be worth it at that point. And so I would just say, tell your landlord, see if you can work it out with the landlord, right? If you can just agree to, keep the noise down during certain hours, right? If there's certain hours where you need to be on the Zoom meetings, or maybe, try to find sort of a more quiet space where you can work from, just to compromise with the landlord at the time that he's doing these renovations. Hopefully they won't last forever, and you'll be able to resolve the problem by doing that, because it really is stressful putting forth a lawsuit. If you have a landlord who is out of town and the property manager just isn't doing a good job, the first thing I would say do is communicate with your landlord, because I would be willing to bet that the landlord has no idea, right? They're just paying this person and assuming that they are doing their job, which is just not always the case. So I think that if you communicate it with the landlord, they will take some steps to fix the problem. However, if you don't get any resolve after you communicate that with the landlord, then certainly your next thing should be to make a different ask, right? You tell your landlord, if you want me to continue doing this, there needs to be compensation, or I'm not going to continue doing this, and I'm going to want out of the lease, right? So make sure that you have a clear ask when you go to your landlord. And what I find is that in most times you can resolve the issue. So if you are a tenant who is dealing with problems regarding lead-based paint in your home, what you should first do, of course, is notify your landlord that this problem exists. Make sure that you notify him in writing. And also, if you want to really be generous, let him know that the city of Cleveland has resources for him. The city of Cleveland does have a program that will help him to remediate the lead problems. If you can't get any traction with him remediating the lead problems, next I would reach out to legal aid, because you'd want to get your children tested if you have small children in the home to make sure that they don't have lead exposure. And if they do have lead exposure, then there's going to be other litigation that may need to happen along the way. Just make sure that you document everything. Document when you notified him. Document any other person that you've reached out to for help, because all of that will come in handy should you need to sue your landlord based on exposure to lead paint. One more resource for exposure to lead-based paint is the Ohio Department of Health. So you can reach out to them to have your child or the home tested for lead paint exposure. If you're a tenant and you're experiencing problems with mold in your apartment, the first thing you want to do, I would say, is just really be clear that it's mold. There are really inexpensive ways that you can test to make sure that you have mold. And once you're sure, certainly notify your landlord right away. You want to notify him in writing, and make sure that he understands that this is really serious, because mold is extremely hazardous, right? And you don't want to, live in a space with mold exposure for a very long time, because you'll start to experience health symptoms that are problematic. So if your landlord doesn't fix the problem within a reasonable time, you can either take your rent money to escrow in a local court and let the court hold the rent money and determine whether the landlord should even receive the money if he doesn't fix the problem. You can also do what's called compelling the repairs. So you can ask the court to step in and force him to make these repairs. And ultimately, if none of that works out, you can certainly break the lease. But whatever route you decide, you want to do something that is swift, because you don't want to live in a property that is exposing you to mold. It's very, very dangerous. Seller finance agreements are used often in a number of situations. One situation may be where the tenant really wants to buy the property, but unfortunately can't get financing from a traditional bank. Some people call it a rent to own. Some people call it seller financing. So you can enter an agreement at that time. And the way it works is, what you do is you just hire an attorney to draw up a contract for you. And the contract is going to spell out all of the really, really important terms, like the price that you're going to ultimately pay for the house, the interest that you're going to pay over the number of years, the monthly payment, things of that nature will be in the contract. And you'll have your rent to own or your seller financed agreement. And if you stick to it for the term of the agreement, you'll be the owner of the house at the end of that term, as the landlord will be required under the contract to transfer the property to you.